afternoon. Hopefully everybody can hear me and is logged in. I know we've got a couple stragglers here logging in, so I will start with kind of an introduction of myself and our guest expert that we have with us today. I am Ashley Faulkner with Journey Employer Solutions. I run all of our webinars. I run our sales here. And with us today we have Mark Weaver with Open Door Solutions. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, thanks for having me, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks for coming. If you attended our last webinar, you know that we are really doing a big focus on company culture, how to keep employees happy, what do you do to change things up and just kind of make your business and your culture one of fun and one that employees want to continue coming to, stay engaged with, but overall happiness as well. So the reason that we asked Mark to host this with us today is simply because he has a large, vast knowledge of company culture, helping to create and define things within your business that until we had really, been able to dive into ours, we were lacking in that here at Journey as well. So Mark really did take us from nothing to something pretty quickly when it came to defining some things. So really excited to go ahead and get this one started today. So we will go ahead and start powering through some slides here. So why is culture important? There are so many whys, and there are probably 100 answers as well that we don't have time unless we took all day to go through exactly why culture is important. But, Mark, what are some of the main reasons why culture is so important that you see on your side?
Well, I think, for one, many employers think that they can just hire anybody and they need a skill set as opposed to somebody who actually fits their culture. By the same token, many people think that they could just take a job anywhere and fit in and be fine, and neither one of them is really true. So it's not that employment is like dating, but if you think about it, in that kind of relationship, you get pretty good at knowing who each other is and being sure that you're compatible. It's too bad that we don't use those same kind of skills often in the area of employment, because I think it would save us a lot of heartaches. What I mean by that is, let's say that you have a company that their culture is very fast-paced and very decisive and a little dog-eat-dog, perhaps, and everybody there likes it, but they recruit somebody with good skills who doesn't like that kind of thing. All of a sudden, that individual is going to either pull back and feel like the company is toxic, or they're going to try to change it to what they think is better, and neither of those work very well. Conversely, you could have a nice company that's very traditional, very perhaps soft, not nearly as in your face, and you can have a whole bunch of people there who like it. They hire somebody who is very aggressive, and that person's going to feel very out of place. Everybody else is going to wonder why in the world management hired that individual, and it just, again, that person could think, well, they're stuck in a time warp. They don't know what they're doing. They must be lucky to have gotten here. Boy, they need me. And then they start trying to change the culture as well. And even if they don't try to, they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point for sure on why it's so important. When we talk about, creating a culture internally, obviously it's not just something that can happen in one meeting, one foul swoop. There is nothing, but I assume, many steps, as we saw on our side when we sat through this with you. But it is a multi-step process because there are so many things that you try to line out and define when you talk about your culture. And the different factors that contribute to it, and what do you, overall, what do you want, define at the end of this?
Sure.
Being able to say, our company culture is this doesn't necessarily change anything. It's how it's implemented
for sure.
that is important.
Yeah, I like to say that your culture is created by everything the leaders do, say, promote, or allow. And so even though you might say something, if you don't say it clear enough, it's not going to really help.
Right.
If you do something different from that, if you allow a behavior that's contrary to that, worse, if you promote somebody into a management position or seem to okay a behavior that's contrary to it, your culture erodes to that kind of least common denominator,
Mhm.
and that becomes your culture no matter what it is you've said. But the better job you do of defining who you are and then holding to that, the more clear it becomes to everyone else. I think I use about a 10-step process, and I want businesses and organizations to actually think through that and not just say, oh yeah, we have the best culture, we have the best people or whatever. Everybody says that.
Right.
And so you almost have to look at it as a way of distinguishing yourself and,
Definitely.
you know, call it special sauce if you want, call it whatever you want, but it's not so much your people that become your, as we love to say, most important asset. It's really your culture, because your culture will attract people who like it that way, and they will fit and they will thrive, and it works. It really works well together. But you got to protect it. It's kind of funny. The word culture actually comes from a French word that means to cultivate. And if you think about a plot of land and what grows natural, it's weeds.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same way it is with an organization. Flip side, if you work that plot of land, you know, you can cultivate something that produces flowers for whatever it may be. And the same thing's true of your culture and your company. If you work at it, it produces. But it's not a one-time thing. You have to continually work on it, continually enforce it, just like you have to in cultivating land.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to make a point. I meant to say this when we first started as well, but if anybody has any questions throughout this, please feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat box so that we can definitely address any questions as they come or as we're going through certain things. We will have Mark's contact info at the very end, and I also have Mark's contact info, so should any of you on this webinar miss that or need an introduction, I would be happy to do so. I just wanted to make sure we made that clear before we move too far in. So I think, you know, we've kind of taken a couple of the steps, obviously, you know, 10 steps we can't go through necessarily in a webinar here today, but I know that, you know, 10 steps can sound like it's a lot, but it's really not once you start breaking down, you know, what you want to accomplish and who you want to be and spend the time to do it. So we did kind of pull up a few different steps here. So, you know, talking about identifying our culture, who we are as a company, who we want to be. I remember doing this with you, Mark, and it was really interesting to kind of be put on the spot a little bit to say, you know, what do we want for our culture and who do we want to be and who do we think we are? And, you know, we can't be too timid to reach high, right? Because that's what we, you know, ultimately that's where we want it to be. So, you know, this first part of this is really just kind of identifying, you know, our culture and who we want our people to be and talking about talent branding and, you know, what are kind of your takeaways from this first part?
Sure. Well, the reason that the identifying your culture is so important is because I think generic is your enemy. When all employers out there are saying the same things and we all want to be employer of choice, whatever it is that we all like to say, or that we value honesty and, you know, just generic things like that, it doesn't set you apart. And so it's not helping you find anybody but those who just want a job. And you probably don't want to hire somebody who just wants a job. You want to hire somebody who's passionate about the same things that you are. So in your case, you know, customer service is extremely high. So skills, that's great. You know, you want somebody who's skills, but you also want somebody who's wired to really value the customer relationship like you all do. Otherwise, again, it just becomes kind of marketing material that your clients don't see lived out.
Definitely.
So the getting clear is very important just from a standpoint of that talent branding or employment brand in terms of what sets you apart in the employment market. But I like to say that your marketing brand really, it's kind of circular. It influences your employment brand. Your employment brand allows you to hire people who deliver on the marketing brand. So they're all tied together and need to be. And so just as you wouldn't do an advertisement for your company and say, we're really a swell payroll company and expect it to get any results. You can't do that with your employment brand either. You've got to be distinct. There are some things that some companies do that consultants, books, whatever may instruct them in. For instance, a lot of organizations will come up with a mission statement, but it doesn't necessarily really tell you why they're here and what they're about. Sometimes it's kind of generic. You know, we're going to be the best. Great. They'll come up with vision statements that sound almost more like the organizational equivalent to somebody standing in front of a mirror and giving themselves personal affirmations, like, oh, we are whatever, as opposed to painting a picture of what this thing can look like and where we're going.
Right.
And really, that's what people need. People need to believe that the leaders have an idea where they're going and how to get there, and that they see something beyond the immediate, because that's what people like. That's that big picture they want to be able to see.
Definitely.
So again, those ways of defining those things that make it clear and that help your team get it, and then help you recruit people who like it, and it just gets reinforced.
And live in it.
So
and I will tell everybody too. I think when we sat down with you to do this for Journey specifically, being able to kind of create the mission and vision was probably the most eye-opening thing, and I would challenge any business, that even thinks they may kind of say, oh, we have a mission statement or we have a vision. It's actually sitting down and putting pen to paper and really pulling that out. That was probably the most eye-opening thing for us, and I feel like we grew so much more by having that and being able to kind of, walk through that with you.
Well, it's fun when you get through the end of it and you actually see a definition of who you are and it works and it fits and it's you and like, wow, we've got this on paper. This is who we are. Neat. But I think part of the reason it works is because I don't just jump into mission vision. I have a few steps before that. And so once you get through those, then it makes a lot more sense than just trying to create those couple things, kind of out of thin air. So it's just built on something.
Absolutely. Kind of, once obviously you start to get some things outlined and how everything applies and how everything fits together, it is kind of like a puzzle, and when you start at the beginning, you've got all these puzzle pieces and then as you start walking through the process, you really are, completing that puzzle and putting everything together in the way that it should and it fits well as it should. And I think that's so hugely important. And not just externally, but internally, right? Because we want to, as much as we want to push this out externally, it's only as good as it works internally.
Very true. And in fact, for instance, a lot of organizations will define values. Some of that is done well. Some is, generic things like value, quality, and honesty. Nobody's going to say they don't.
Right.
So it doesn't mean a lot unless you put some definition to it.
Most definitely.
But if you don't reinforce that in other ways, if you don't have group norms that are more internally that drive that, your clients aren't going to see the things that you have on your website that say they are your values because they won't see it walking around in your workplace. And so I think it's real important to boil some of that stuff down to where it's behaviors that people expect of one another, hold themselves accountable to, hold each other accountable to. It kind of becomes a peer pressure thing. Because once you start understanding your ways, if you will, then when something deviates from it, people can kind of scratch their head and go, wait a minute, that's not like us. That's not our way. Our way is this. And so it really causes the team to kind of to reinforce that all together. It's fun.
Definitely. And to Mark's point too, it's funny when you sit down and you think about the values of your company. I would probably say everybody listening to would venture to throw out honesty and integrity. And it is funny because then when you look at it as, well, is that really something that people don't value? You really have to question yourself on these values. Not that you don't want those to be values, but that of course everybody wants those to be values, but really you dissect it more than just, that's great. Everybody wants honesty. Nobody wants dishonesty. So
and if you did, you sure wouldn't advertise it.
Right. Another big part of this, I would say, and we have found internally as well, is really defining the roles that you have within your organization and being able to make sure, not only do the roles fit within your culture that you're trying to define, but making sure you have the right people to fit within those roles that ultimately do then need to fit in with the culture, right?
And I think in terms of defining the roles, everybody thinks of standard job descriptions, which honestly, for the most part, are pretty boring documents that employees probably don't read. We tend to think that, it's out there, they can, and therefore we're protected for whatever reason. And yet, That's kind of a wrong reason to try to define a job.
Sure.
I think you really want to start broader than that, and not talk so much about activity and busyness as much as overall responsibility. But even in addition to that, I like to start with a job description much broader and talk about the context that the job has to be done in. And so I ask questions such as, where does this role fit within the mission of the organization? Why are the values that we talk about, why do they have to be evident in the way this job is done? And in doing that, if you define that from the get-go, from the way you write a job description, from the way you post an ad, from the way you orient somebody, onboard them into your organization, you're reinforcing those values. And if they step outside of that, that's where we have to start adjusting things and go, wait a minute, that's not our way.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then, we talk about obviously achieving these goals and how do we get to those goals. And I think, part of what the process that you kind of dissect with, companies as well is not just, just so everyone's clear, it's not just necessarily the overall, culture. It's making sure these pieces are in there. And these are steps that you go through with people to help them get those roles to line up with everything, correct?
Right. Yep.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and then really the next step, and it's the next slide, is where we get into then finding the people who actually fit those roles.
Right.
So yes, skills are important. Yes, somebody having the right background and the right degrees and experience and all that is very important. But if you hire, let's say, a controller for an organization, and that controller is wired totally different from the place, it can be disastrous because it's an important position. Any position can impact in different ways. But let's say, for instance, that you've got a real fast-paced sales organization, and they value speed, they value growth. That's kind of their whole world. Well, they hire a controller who's a CPA, MBA, great experience and all of that, but the controller is kind of the caution person, maybe extremely so. And so even though they have the right skills, they have a good background, they got the pedigree, whatever, they're going to feel like an anti-sales department to a growth-oriented company. Now, flip side, if you took a controller who was into, how do we finance the possibilities and really more out there instead of the dot every I, cross every T kind of thing, balance everything to the penny. If you put that kind of person into the organization that actually doesn't value speed, but values thoroughness and just more organic growth, patience, not real sales oriented, well, that person's going to seem like a maverick. And so the right people can't only be defined by the background and skills and the degrees and the experience. It has to also be defined within the culture of the organization. Right. And again, if you try this without actually defining your culture, you're guessing.
Right, absolutely.
So if you have it defined right, then it's a whole lot easier to
absolutely.
Figure it out.
And one of the things that you did with us, in doing this process here for Journey that I found to be very helpful was you did kind of give us a couple of examples of, here's X company and here's Y company, and you gave us little descriptions about it. And you really helped to paint a picture of, the difference in how different organizations work, but also, to your point, making sure that the people you're hiring are fitting into that, because, yes, you want, while we might want somebody that's, fast-paced and high energy, and, if our company culture didn't speak to that, that person would come in and not be a good fit.
Yeah, and there's variations. I mean, you're obviously going to expect a little bit of a difference between a controller and a VP of sales, and yet they've got to be aligned the same way. Otherwise, and then at an executive level, this really blows up. Otherwise, you've got this kind of infighting and people trying to influence the CEO, and you're not rowing the same direction. It's just hard. And you spend way too much time at work, so you don't want to make it any harder than it needs to be. Yeah, I mean, given more people, you probably spend more time with the people you work with than you do your own family at home sometimes. At least you want to, for sure. Yeah, exactly. You want to make sure that everybody stays together. Right.
Let's talk a little bit too about performance and how, I think one of the biggest things that we get is, I don't like doing performance reviews, or how do I make sure a performance review stays within line of what we've created? But also, how do we keep those employees engaged enough to make sure that this all ties together and makes sense? Because, I think that's a big part of it too, is making sure we're outlining everything along the way.
It is. And again, I would say generic as you're going to be.
Yeah.
You can pull a form off of the internet and it looks like it's a nice complete form and it'll, save your butt in the event that you have to fire somebody and are afraid of being sued. That's a really wrong motive. I think probably about 0.5% might be bad performers in a typical workplace, but the other 99.5, or even if it's lower, 95%,
Right.
Those are the people you should be defining the whole performance management system around, not the other. There's insurance products to help you with that, EPLI, things such as that, I think, most businesses have huge risks, way bigger than the employee side of things, and yet sometimes we try to design so many employer-needed things around those risks when business leaders and entrepreneurs, are facing all kinds of risks besides just the employment piece. So I think you have to put it a little bit in perspective. And again, I would design it around the great people, not around the potential problem. That said, generic's not your friend, and you can go buy a really expensive performance appraisal system, an online system, and by the way, I once owned one, designed it, owned one, paid good money for it to be created, but at any rate, those things are really hard to tailor to your own culture, and it's not just that you want to stick your values in a performance appraisal form. You want the form to be in your organization's language. You want it to be, a more methodical kind of place, and you want it more thorough, a very fast-moving, more goal-oriented place. You want it to be quick. But either way, there's a lot of ways you can do performance appraisal, from 15-minute discussions to hour-long debates to whatever you want. But again, it needs to fit the culture. I also think it should be something that can easily be done in about 15 minutes. And on a quarterly basis. And to me, you're way better doing a more frequent discussion that's quick and not nearly as thorough than having an annual, very thorough discussion of stuff that happened 9 months ago.
9 months,
And so that's part of what I try to do. And then in it, I'm using the appraisal to reinforce the culture. And that is part of what the employee needs to be able to see. A direct line between what they do and the mission, a direct line between how they do what they do and the values and norms.
Perfect. Wonderful. This step 5 here, we do a lot of, fun things here at Journey, and I'm sure a lot of other companies try to keep things fun as well. But, when you appreciate your employees and you show them that and you reward them and you recognize them for jobs well done, and not necessarily tying it exactly to a specific job well done, right? Because internally here we have what we call our Shirley Bird Award, and it's a monthly award for somebody that has done something, above and beyond. We want to say, everybody here at Journey, every day I wish I could recognize my entire staff for all the great things that they do. Because, we do appreciate what they do, we recognize what they do. But this is kind of one of our ways of being a little more fun once a month for somebody that really took it a step further. And this is something internally for us, that we everybody nominates within and everybody votes within, and it's just a fun thing for us. And we encourage our clients even, anytime we talk to them, do fun things. I mean, we go as far as doing, the basketball leagues and pools and picking your team and who's going to win and football pick-ems. I mean, just silly things that none of us may have a clue about, but it engages the staff. It's fun, it's, rewarding, but, on a serious note, on the flip side, we also do try to really make sure that, each and every day our staff knows how much we appreciate them. And I would assume that's a big part of it as well.
It really is. It's funny, I read an article by a famous consultant in a famous business magazine recently where he was saying those programs don't work. And I thought that's interesting because I can think of several companies where they do employee nominated awards that everybody is really bought into. So I disagree. Here's what I think though. If back when I got a chance to speak at your last event, I came walking in with a laptop and probably some other stuff. So if as I was coming in, somebody opened the door for me, and then I got up to do my presentation, and I gave them a $100 gift card, that would seem very out of place. Now, if I hadn't said thank you for opening the door, then I would have seemed like a jerk. That's appreciation. If that person then said, hey, let me help you, and took my laptop and my box and brought it up with me, giving them, calling them out and just saying, hey, I want to recognize that, wow, that was really nice of you. You went beyond. And so if I gave them a $50 gift card, that'd be pretty neat. If I never said thank you, I'd be a jerk. But flip side, let's say that there was some thug on the parking lot who hit me over the head and started to run off with my computer, and the person chased him down, tackled him, got my computer back, held him until the police got there to get a lecture from the police for being a vigilante or whatever. But they, if I didn't do something more on the reward side for the person actually taking risk, then it would seem wrong almost. And so people have an expectation, depending on what they do, of this falling in one of these places. When you over reward something that should just be appreciation, that it feels awkward and people don't want to be put on the spot. Nobody ever minds you saying thank you. And you can do that every day, and it can be free. And that's where appreciation
is free. Kindness is free.
It is. And there's different ways to do it. I mean, notes and cards, and you don't have to even buy anything. You can.
It doesn't have to cost you money.
And you can recognize great performance and give somebody a $5 gift card to Mugs or whatever, and, just that's a nice feel-good. The real thing to do with the recognition and reward side of things, in my mind, is think in terms of residual value. And so either create a memory or create a trophy. One or the other that they will look back on and go, wow, and it creates an emotional attachment. And I think that's what you want. But if all you do is reward and you don't actually stop and say thank you, the reward doesn't mean nearly as much.
And that's a great point too, because I think people probably get stuck in that world of, not realizing the difference and how much that can make an impact.
Each is valid.
Absolutely. And engage your team. I mean, we talk about this, I think our last webinar kind of tried to focus a little bit more on engaging the team and getting everybody together. But, that's not just a one-shot thing, right? Engaging your team has to be something that you're always doing. It's repetitive. It's ingrained in everything that you do, so that you don't get to a point where your team is so far, gone that you can't get them engaged, and or it takes you a lot of time and energy to bring them back in to engagement.
I think a lot of times organizations make the mistake of trying to engage people in happiness or something to that effect, when really many of them want to be engaged for their brain. They want to feel like they're valued because they're in the trenches, they have a perspective that you might not have as the owner or as the leader. And if you want to create an ownership mentality, then you've got to rely on people in their job and help them be part of decisions impacting their job, because they do have a different set of eyes. As you know, I worked for this quality guru, best-selling author early in my career, and he used to say, this is Philip Crosby, but he used to say that if you listen to people in the trenches and you hear the hassles, fix the hassles, quality improves, morale goes up, and your financial picture improves as well. And he proved it over and over again. And so I look for ways to engage the team, to help them feel like owners, like they've got a vested interest in it, as opposed to it just being a job that they come to. And, I've done that with organizations that are facing budget cuts, organizations that need to grow in sales, organizations that want to expand into a new realm, a new territory, whatever. But when you get people involved and you're basically sending a message that I value for your perspective, for your brain, for your intelligence, they're engaged in a way that you can't ever get them by just trying to engage them in just being happy, because you're giving them kind of this sense of self-actualization. I mean, you're allowing them to feel that self-actualization, like they're a valued part of the team, not just because of appreciation, but actually because you trust them, you value what they bring.
And Mark, you work with, obviously you work with owners of businesses to help define, levels on kind of the ownership side. You also work with teams though, right? If an organization said, look, I want you to work with maybe my ownership or leadership team first and kind of get a good, understanding of things, but you also take it as far as working with employees or groups of their staff in order to kind of help help with this kind of stuff,
Yeah,
right?
actually, one of my biggest PR moments several years ago now was with a large not-for-profit in Weld County. They had about 165 or so employees, and they had gotten word from the state that the budget was going to be cut by $400,000. And when they first reached out, they just wanted somebody to manage a layoff, and they didn't want to be on the front page of the paper too often. They didn't want to get sued, and I'm like, oh, I can do it. It's the wrong answer.
Yeah.
You know, this is a time to do something more legacy-like. Involve your people. Let's reinvent your organization. So we formed a team of 8 very passionate people, and literally over a month, we took the whole organization apart and put it back together for long-term viability. The budget cut actually ended up being double, which by their estimates would have meant they would have to lay off 20 to 24 people for that 800,000, and instead we laid off 3. But we communicated in a way they'd never been communicated with before. There was this employee team that couldn't believe they were asked to even be at the table.
Right.
And, you know, there's some labor law things you have to kind of play with and be a little bit careful with, but I know what those are. But at any rate, that was an example of I wasn't working with the executives at all. I was working with a team of passionate employees who then made recommendations, and I brought those forward to the executive team at that point. But, you know, those kind of things happen too.
Yeah.
And it's really fun because that changes the culture a whole lot. In this particular culture, people didn't feel like management listened to them. All of a sudden, wow, management's not only listening, they're empowering them to make recommendations on the success of the organization. So it was really neat. And so morale went way up despite the ugly financial situation they were facing. So.
Yeah. That's awesome. Communication, I mean, we always say that here too. Communication is such a big part of everything.
Yeah.
And then, you know, again, in our last webinar, for those that were able to catch that, work-life balance, we talk about that here all the time. That's something that we strive like crazy to be able to really drill into our staff, but also, you know, the leaders here, and making sure, you know, I think as a leader, it's very easy to say, I want my staff to have a good work-life balance. You know, I want to create something good for them. I want to make sure they get time off and they're taking care of themselves. You know, but as a leader, that's also important to us to have good work-life balance, because, you know, we are what we preach to everybody, right? And so they look to us for, you know, that leadership and guidance. And if we're not giving ourselves a good work-life balance, that's not going to flow through to them either. And you know. Yeah, and it depends on the company. There could be people listening who are in CPA firms where there's no such thing as work-life balance before April 15th. Absolutely.
And I have a family member who's one of those. Yeah. And, you know, it's 80-hour weeks at least. And, you know, there is not really a sense of that. So therefore you have to find other ways. Absolutely. You know, and perhaps some of the other ways are you get a whole lot of flexibility in the summer or something like that. Yeah. The fun part is, and I don't know the makeup of who's listening, but for smaller companies that can't afford all of the benefits and the bells and whistles that some of the big ones can, sometimes you can afford flexibility that big companies can't do either. Absolutely. And that becomes a competitive advantage. And, you know, and it can work in your favor as well. So there's an awful lot of people today that value time, and they value, you know, that balance in a way that they really don't care nearly as much about your 401k or some of the other things, because, you know, balancing their own personal life gets challenging. And, you know, a couple generations ago, when you stayed in the same town that your parents were there and you had built-in grandparent babysitters, you know, it's nice, but that's not most people's reality anymore, and so it's harder, you know. And so anyway, that time is a great thing when you can do it. It just depends on the industry. You know, absolutely, and I love that you brought up, you know, the CPA industry, because that's always the best, we feel sometimes, is an example of, you know, that work-life balance. Is there are times they just can't, and everybody knows that. But on the flip side, you know, we've gained a lot of insight on that from different, you know, people that we know in the industry that have been able to share with us that sometimes that means during the summer, though, they get some really great quality time, you know, out of the office. And so it's just about kind of trying to figure out that perfect. The whole thing, I think, is, you know, very often bosses will complain about people who have more of an entitlement mentality. What have you done for me lately? I find that happens when people don't feel like they're as involved, and it's the old, you know, treat me like a mushroom kind of thing mentality. And instead, if you can switch that to more of an ownership mentality where people, and I don't mean that you have to give them stock necessarily, it's not a bad idea if you can, But I don't mean ownership in terms of equity. I mean ownership in terms of owning your job, feeling emotionally attached to it, to where you're treating it like it's your company. And I think the more that you, again, engage people in their job and in the team and in the future success, and you help them see the vision and all of that, it's just a lot easier to get them out of that entitlement mode. Because when you get there, it's never a really good balance. You know, it's, you know, you'll think as the boss, well, gee, I just gave you a raise 3 months ago, you know. It's always this, you know, equity issue that doesn't really get resolved. But I've worked with organizations that have had to give a 20% across the board pay cut and haven't missed a beat in terms of morale. But that's only because their team was very engaged and very much felt like owners and cared. I had one client who unfortunately went under in the downturn. It was a manufacturing company with about 50 employees. And I was there at the team meeting when he's telling everybody it's over. And all these individuals are like, can we work for free? You know, can we work for free and try to help pull you out of it? And it was too late. But to me, just the fact that they were willing to go to zero just to try to help the company, you know, was kind of amazing. But anyway, it was cool. Wonderful. It was cool. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but a little too late.
Right. So let's talk about deviation from culture. You know, obviously consistency is key, but if somebody doesn't mesh, if somebody, you know, doesn't fit in, if you find that, you know, you've kind of got that bad apple, you know, how...
Well, and, you know, it might not even be a bad apple or a bad egg. It may just be a whole different one, you know. Y'all are bananas and you got an apple. I mean, I don't know, however you want to work it. But it's, you know, again, the more you've defined your culture, the more you've reinforced it with the job, the way it's advertised, the way you onboard, the way you appraise performance, it starts becoming obvious rather than it being this kind of nebulous, cloudy thing where you think, I don't know if they're really fit or not, you know. And ultimately, it should be pretty clear to both the employee and the owner or leader as well. But you've got to hold people accountable to the values. When people aren't, and you know, on the appraisal side of things, you know, if you're actually appraising how they're doing their job, in terms not just the what, the how. Are you doing it our way, or, you know, in terms of the ways that look like our values? Then this is going to get discussed a bit. But ultimately, you can't let it go on and on and on and on and on without it really bothering your great team members, without it potentially impacting your clients. Not that the person's bad, not that their skills are bad, but if the way is different, it's not going to look like you. And then your values and your culture don't mean much. So you've got to deal with that. It's way better to deal with things early than it is late. Most employers on these kind of things keep giving the person a chance to get in line, to change their values, and it doesn't happen. Performance, I agree. People can improve, and you should give them opportunities. But when the values are counter to your values, it's probably not going to change. And so try, sure, but don't let it go on and on and on and on and on, because it will impact the organization internally and externally. There are ways that you can part ways with dignity and respect, and you should. You know, I've had to help clients do that, sometimes with some really great employees, but they're just totally wrong in a particular organization. And, you know, the risks, there's always risks out there. The employer's practices liability insurance is a good thing to have. I would advise everybody to check to be sure they have it, because we live in a litigious society. It's just the way it is. But a lot of things come down to how you treat people, even upon separation. And there are ways to get closure when you want to do that. And there are ways to, not just closure for the employer, but closure for the other individual as well. But avoiding it, it just grows, it festers. And often what happens with really nice bosses is they keep trying to let the person have another opportunity, and then something else goes wrong. And oh great, now they've hurt their back. Oh, now we have a workers' comp claim. Oh, now whatever. It gets more and more complex and harder to untangle.
So, that makes sense. And it looks like that kind of wraps up the overall, you know, presentation itself. is there anything else, Mark, that we didn't get to hit on that you feel like would be good for people to know? I mean, obviously, I don't want to, your time is very valuable. Also, you know, what you bring to companies to kind of dissect this is far more intense than what we just did here in our little webinar. But, you know, having people reach out to you is key, obviously. And sitting down with you, I know you're very open to even just sitting down and talking with people about what is going to be something, how do we tackle this? Because again, 10 steps can seem a little bit overwhelming, but at the same time, it can be dissected into, let's start here, you know, and really kind of work on things and grow into, you know, perfecting everything.
Well, honestly, I'd be happy to sit down and grab coffee for someone and just chat for an hour and you know, just answer any questions, just see what may be useful. Anybody can put time on my calendar at Calendly, which is spelled Calendly, calendly.com/open-door, or you just send me an email at that. But I'll meet at any local coffee shop. With anybody who wants to, and just
we love
chat.
running into you there, so that's always fun.
I know all the local places. But anyway, so yeah, I would be very open to just sitting down and talking at some point. But you know, I think to me we've already hit it, but just recognizing that culture is really got to be first among equals. And I'm not saying that quality is not important or the financial picture isn't important or anything else, but you can actually define the quality and the financial picture within the context of the culture. And then once you have that culture defined, you just got to fight for it. You got to hold it. You can't let anything pull you from it. When you make a deviation from it, which we all do, we all, you know, do something like, oops, shouldn't have done that, then own it and you know, make it clear, you know, wow, I did that in a way that wasn't true to us. And, you know, I'm just holding myself accountable for it, and I've learned from it, and then get back to being who you are. But just stay on it, cultivate it. You know,
absolutely.
I finished my first draft of a book, so hopefully the examples I use, I'm just plagiarizing myself when you turn out to my little pet companies that I have kind of pulled together from an amalgamation of various clients. But anyway, but in that, just trying to show how each of these steps can be done very differently based on the culture of the organization, and in my mind should be. You should not do a generic ad, you should not do a generic job description, you should not do a generic performance appraisal. Things need to be in your language, in your style. They need to look like the organization. That's when it seems authentic and when it matters.
Absolutely. Well, I see book club in our future then. If
I hope so.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Again, anybody can reach out to Mark directly. His info is there on the screen. You can also reach out to me, and I would be happy to facilitate an introduction. So again, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Mark.
Any questions?
Nope, no questions that I saw as of now. So,
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you. You guys take care. Have a great rest of your day.